Well, everybody, welcome back to the show. I really appreciate you joining us. One of the things I love about doing this podcast is I get to reconnect with old friends and people that I've admired along the way. So today I have an old friend, Val Bercovicci. Val is the CEO of PencilDATA, and we're going to talk about what that is because it's a highfalutin technology company that I'm having trouble figuring it out. But the reason I asked Val to be on the show is we both grew up in the tech industry. We both were in working for some of the fastest growing, highest paced, demanding careers anybody could be in. And what I love about Val is when he came into town and we would go on trips go to see clients, we talk about life. We talk about what it was like to be in the tech industry. And now he's the CEO of his own company. So he's grown up and actually won the game to date, to this date. So Val, thanks for being on the show.
It's a real pleasure, Mark, and you can tell we're old friends because you don't stumble over my name. You know how to pronounce it first shot.
Well, I was trying to figure out if now that you're a CEO, I should be calling you Valentine.
I use that, just it sounds more exotic, obviously, nowadays, particularly in North America, but everyone here knows me
It
as well.
sounds so cool. I can see you on CNBC, and now Valentine Bercovicci, right? It's so much better. But Val, we were just talking before we started hitting record. Is in the tech industry, especially around the turn of the century into the year 2000, we were so full of our own propaganda. Like we worked for a company called Network Appliance, now NetApp. And I always used to joke with people that the battle of good and evil is being waged on earth in the storage industry and all our souls are at stake, right? That's what we had to do in order to be able to survive what they asked of us, right? The price of being in the 1%.
Exactly.
And what I always appreciated about you was you always took it with a grain of salt and a little bit of humor.
Yeah, I think it's my background, my upbringing, right? And I'm a typical immigrant where I was born in Eastern Europe. I was born in Romania. Immigrated, actually was sort of bought out of Romania by a wealthy family out of Montreal that owns the Seagrams Corporation, the Bronfman family, and bought into Israel. Actually, they bought our freedom. And after Israel, emigrated into Montreal. And so I think it's that upbringing that, always taught me, there's more things to life than business, and certainly, teaches you humility, because I think every time we moved with nothing. And it's kind of an empathy I've developed over the years that I've tried hard not to let go of. That's kind of what helped me retain my sanity and humanity along the way, because as you say, the tech business is on this permanent acceleration process right now. And that has all sorts of advantages and disadvantages and drawbacks. And perspective is about the only thing that keeps a human right now. And I see a lot of people that I respect from business people that have lost it, but also plenty of people that I choose to hang out with, such as yourself, that have not.
So let's talk about just how to keep perspective. So you had something from your childhood that helped you. I grew up poor also. So like I always kind of just laughed at the fact that I'm driving a Lexus convertible and I live in Vienna, Virginia. Like this is foreign to me, right? So I was always kind of in awe of my own success, right? I came to Washington D.C. homeless, so like this was always with a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Like I don't really belong hanging out with you people. But one of the things I noticed about you is you were on planes all the time. So you were definitely working the fast pace. You were raising a family, but you also made decisions and choices and set boundaries that other people at the time didn't. Do you remember that?
I've had a divorce since then, so I think, some of those decisions and boundaries might not have been the best ones, but I certainly don't regret anything from that perspective. Nevertheless, it was always a conscious effort, and I think I realized I hit my own sort of rock bottom when I felt like when I got home, I was nearly in between trips and it wasn't really home anymore. That was sort of my rock bottom. And that's where I realized, I have to readjust my work-life balance. I have to discover, whether it's a business or whether it's, an employer that lets me actually be home at home and make trips as opposed to the other way around. It's a really interesting mindset. I think a lot of frequent business flyers in particular have that, could be great if you're a bachelor, could be great if you're work is your number one life priority, but not so great otherwise.
And so how'd you do that? How did you shift that?
I literally changed careers. I mean, that was one of the big things. I loved, I was, I think, a 3 million miler, on Star Alliance, and it got the ultimate treatment and got to choose my meals first and all that. And those are very, very vanity things. And you realize that after a while that, it's not exactly the most important thing in life. But I just made the conscious decision that I had to get into a line of work. And this is why I'm running my own company now, that lets me, make those kinds of decisions, lets me understand what can keep my income steady and still have a life. And it was all about, for example, a tech business born out of the San Francisco Bay Area. Silicon Valley, as outsiders know it, is a really good place to not have to travel that much, because you have a lot of what we call design partners, which are early customers right in your backyard.
Was it an internal thing or an external thing that had you start to shift? Was it external forces like your marriage breaking apart, or did you actually know this yourself?
The marriage breaking apart was definitely the first domino. And then it became clear. I think there were literally just some business forces where the company you and I, started at, which went through a golden era that we were very lucky to be part of. NetApp certainly was entering a second and third phase, its own midlife crisis, so to speak. It was no longer the company you and I and some of the founders that we revere, were leading anymore. And in addition to not being as lucrative, it wasn't as much fun, which is the most important thing for me to work. I realized early on that if I'm not enjoying my work, I'm not good at it. And so that just led to a series of decisions where I kind of left and got reacquired in a certain sense by that company, but ultimately decided it was literally time professionally to move on and satisfy my scientific and academic curiosity. And now that I'd moved out here to the Bay Area, an opportunity really to explore entirely new technologies and businesses around it.
So what do you say to other people like you? So you see someone who's in their early 30s, and you see them, they've got their 3 million miles, or
Yeah,
they're hustling, and you watch and you see the strain in their families. Do
yeah.
you ever talk to them about what you've learned?
When they ask, I'm certainly never, impose my thoughts on someone, but, people like you obviously often do ask. And I kind of go through the same life story. And, I'm trying to teach this to my kids as well, my oldest kids, certainly. But it does come around to the fact that there is no such thing as work-life balance, particularly if you're in these high-paced type of environments. And so you have to decide, where the pendulum will be at any given time. And maybe it averages out over 30 or 40 years, but it's certainly not balanced at any given moment or day or week or even month or year. So it's a, can you make a conscious decision with your partner, if you're in that kind of arrangement, to put, a whole bunch of emphasis for 1 year on work and sacrifice some of the home life? Or do you reach a point where maybe, your kids need you, your partner needs you, you need, your own spiritual reawakening, and you actually consciously put work, aside and not focus as much and focus on yourself? And the cool thing I'm seeing is that there are elements now, and this is maybe, again, my own bubble that I've created. We just talked about Twitter before starting the podcast. I started to curate my feeds, for example, on social media, and I'm pretty much just down to Twitter, but around people that value that and have made those conscious decisions, and the employers they work for emphasize a whole management hierarchy. It may not go all the way to the top, but certainly a whole middle management hierarchy that values that and lets people have their personal time and lets people, rebalance themselves by sacrificing work when appropriate. You literally have to make that decision. You can't have it all.
Are you seeing a trend there? Are you seeing because you're right in the hotbed of it?
Yeah.
Are you seeing actually people realizing that burning their people out is not the most profitable way of living?
Yeah, very, very literally. We're seeing it. So I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time in the open source community when I was at NetApp, leading a couple efforts. Had the real privilege of being in the early days of the Kubernetes movement, as part of the Linux Foundation. And a lot of the people I see there that are gainfully employed by all the big tech brands that we know, they have an ethos and a philosophy of, definitely, it's not at all about work hard and play hard. That's a anthem of the past. It's about understanding that there's humans at the end of all these keyboards and all that code that we use every day. And those humans have a life, and those humans have medical issues, and they have kids, and they have partners, and they have parents that are aging. And managers going out of their way to talk about how they're giving their employees a space to be able to deal with life giving them the flexibility of, there's one trend that I love more than anything else is a few of the really popular tech conferences don't start on a Sunday. That's a hideous thing to do to employees, right? They don't even start on a Monday. They have some optional training days on a Monday, so you can actually be at home with your family on a Sunday night, fly somewhere during some optional training sessions on the Monday, and the keynote is Tuesday. That's a tech conference that I think a lot more people are gravitating to as they make these better life choices.
That's such a simple little thing to honor human beings that
Yes.
it took decades to figure that out. Like that we'd really like to be home for Sunday night dinner, right?
Exactly.
Like I'm
Exactly.
divorced, right? So my partner John and I have Sunday night dinner with my kids every Sunday night. Like it's just, for me, it's the most precious thing on the planet, right? To have that one little meal
Yeah.
together, and to not have to get on a plane makes all the difference in the world.
It really
Right?
does. It's back to that notion of if I'm home the full weekend, home can start to feel like home again. If I'm literally flying in Friday night and sometimes for a European trip have to leave on Saturday or certainly Sunday, that's not really being home for the weekend, not even remotely close.
Got it. So let's shift gears a little bit, because the other thing that I notice is uh, very few people are able to make the transition that you're making from being part of the masses, part of the workforce. What I call the kind of in the hustle, which is the 20 to 30s, where you can do anything, go to the gym in the morning and be at the bar at night and see with your customers and go to Las Vegas and do all that stuff. Then there's the grind where you're raising your
Yeah.
family and you're kind of in middle management, or you're in a sales position and you're making good money, but you're not going anywhere. And then very few make that decision to be who they could be, to be to see what they could create and risk. Because you had a very solid career, right? You could move laterally, you could do whatever you want and never have to stick your neck out to go lead.
Yeah.
But you made the decision to evolve and lead. How did you come to that decision to actually say, you know what, I'm going to bet on myself and my ideas?
In my case, it literally came with age. I think as I was young, being, I think, an immigrant and always a bit of fish out of water wherever I started, and that even included NetApp because that was sort of my first real multi-year, non-startup failure U.S. employment as a Canadian. I think the imposter syndrome started to fade away as I just developed more confidence over a matter of years, not days or weeks or months, but definitely years, and realizing, I can do this. And, I clearly am adding value. People are requesting my time. People are requesting my opinion. And it's a switch that's not easy to turn on. It's a switch that's not easy to find. You certainly, and I don't claim to have conquered this, but you do have to conquer some fears.
So
But
can you so
once,
slow down? So
yeah,
what fears did you have to conquer?
inadequacy. It's as simple as that. Maybe I am good at one thing, but I'm certainly not good at this other thing. Or I'd have to study for so long. Or definitely the comparison of look at some amazing leaders who have had all this success. There's no way I can be as good as them. And you have to realize you can be. All you have to do is try. And very often, even if you fail the first time or the second time, if you keep trying, you are bound to find something by the third time. I remember this one story that I should have learned lessons from when I was in high school, where I was asked, I started hanging out with the drama kids. It was like the whole Glee experience basically in high school near the end. And so they were putting on a great play. I don't even remember what it was about. I don't know if it was locally written or an actual, book or play that they were adapting. So they asked me to audition for any one of the leads. And I said, I can't do that. I'd have stage fright. I'd never, ever remember my lines. And so I'll just, be involved in a production. I literally ended up being in the back room. I was a lighting guy. So I was making sure the spotlight was on the people presenting from across, the little auditorium, or not so little auditorium in high school. So you go to rehearsal, day in, day out, month in, month out. And by the end of the year, the production goes on, and it was a great production. Everyone had a good time. I knew every single character's lines inside, forwards, and backwards. And so that's kind of a lesson of, it's easy to doubt yourself, but most of the time you're making a big mistake by doubting yourself. And, we're all capable of much more than we think we are. And having the confidence, which took me decades to really, to leverage, is what got me to where I am today.
So you made the decision to start your own company.
Yeah. It was, it was, I think, by that point, it was obvious to me that I could do this. It was obvious to me that I've identified. For me, you remember my competitive days, you have to find a gap in the market. You have to find an underserved or unaddressed requirement. And then you have to have the confidence to just go ahead and do it. And I have to say that so Silicon Valley is getting a bad rap, deservedly so right now on several fronts. But in terms of the community support of founder to founder, and even investors that don't invest in you, their willingness to make introductions to other people in their network is a very unique thing. It's something that people try and replicate in other cities here, in other countries. And that support you have amongst your peers, and particularly the respect for failure and learning from failure, as opposed to being a stigma almost everywhere else in the world outside of Silicon Valley, is why this is still a great place to start a tech company.
Makes sense. I'm just curious, how much of that is the culture and is that the experience? And how much is that how you've conducted yourself over the years, the value you've brought to people and the way you treat people? Like, because I think you've built a deep bench of support over the years.
Yeah, there is sort of a gravity in terms of the kinds of people you attract and the kinds of people you choose to hang out with. So that I think that's a big part of it. But the more I've experienced other entrepreneurial environments, if we're talking about entrepreneurship, where I've been, whether it was back in Romania, whether it was Israel, whether it was Canada, particularly Eastern Canada, that I know better than Western Canada now. This place is unique from a cultural perspective, and again, that removal of stigma, which is essential around failure, and then the complementary sort of tolerance and respect for learning from failure. It is unique here, and it is something that I don't think is easy, if at all possible, to replicate almost anywhere else.
So while you dispelled a mythology of Silicon Valley and talked about some of the really beautiful things,
Yeah.
you didn't help me with my question, which is what I wanted to evoke from you, which was, you're only as good as the fertilizer that you've put out over the years. When you want to go do something like
Yeah.
this, right?
Yeah, maybe I'm trying to be as humble as I can here. I think
That
it's
doesn't
about.
help my show. Don't be humble. I want to know what you did to be able to do what you're doing.
I don't know if there's a concise answer for that. I think it's maybe, not to be too cliche, it's a series of little decisions you make over time. And part of that, if I were to, as a kid say IRL, if I were to translate what I do online in real life, it's choosing to respect and follow people that, have morals, have ethics, help, the leadership we had, for example, at NetApp. If you look at Dan and Tom and Rob and some of those other great people, they were all extremely successful business people, but they went out of their way to say that, life is more than business. And the company, to this extent it could, really supported that. So pick your role models well, emulate the things in them, that you really cherish and value, and live by that mantra. Definitely, conduct yourself, particularly people that, follow you or you mentor, or that you explicitly manage, conduct yourself in that way. It's cliche such as walk the walk. It's a lot more than talk the talk.
Yeah, you mentioned those, man. Rob Salmon and Tom Mendoza, Dan Warmenhoven, Eric Mann for me. When I back when I was at NetApp, there just came a point at about 7 years where I hit the wall. I couldn't do it anymore. I was just done, and and they had Tom came to DC, and he said, "You're just in burnout, man. You need some time, right? And go see Eric in New York." And I talked to Rob, and I went to Eric, and I saw Eric in New York, and he said, "You are just burnt out." One of the other executives here actually went through exactly the same thing. I won't name names. He says, and he just had to take 3 months off,
Yeah.
right? So what they did for me, again, in the middle of like this tech company, they said, "We are going to give you 3 months off. We are going to pay um, your benefits, so you'll have health insurance and all that stuff." God, I could cry. And they said, "And if you want to come back, come back. And if you don't want to come back, don't come back."
Yeah.
Right? That's unheard of.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even know that story. That is remarkable, given the era that it was done under, given the industry sector we were involved in, and the category of work. Right, it's high pressure, what have you done for me lately sales, that is a remarkable thing. That, again, that's a level of empathy and management that today people still aspire to, but it was unheard of back then.
I could have been easily replaced, right? And they said, you're not going to have your accounts back because someone has to work your accounts.
Exactly. Yeah.
But and Eric said, you do know this is going to cost you at least $500,000 to bring your book of business back up.
Yeah.
I'm like, I do, but I can't. It took me 3 months to just stop vibrating, right? To find myself, and I think that was the germination of what I do for a living now, right? Like back then was the hallmark of, oh, like my body, my psyche, my soul is telling me I can't keep this up. Like I have to shift either. Yeah. And I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't listen to it, right? Went startup to startup to startup, and then wound up having my crisis that caused all this. So it's an interesting thing. So tell me now, you're the CEO. I've researched your company. I follow you on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I know you do something with encryption, you do something with blockchain and all this stuff, but I really don't understand. I'm not smart enough to understand what you do. What do you do?
Well, we sell a lie detector for data. It's sort of the easiest and simplest thing to explain to lay people, but the company already is 2 years old. It has 2 eras. And, being a technical founder, I always think in terms of research and development. So our first year, 2018, was literally product, market research, developing a product, testing it with our design partners, our early beta customers, and so forth. And we got this really cool lie detector for data to a very functional state, as we like to call it in the business, a minimum viable product, something you can actually use minus the bells and whistles, in its first version. But then the second year, 2019, has been a year of sales and marketing R&D. This is the part that I didn't have as much experience in. This is the part that I relied on other peers and experts to help me with, in the early parts of my career, which is, what do you message? Who are you targeting? Who is the buyer? Not a whole audience of 20 people that have various roles that say, hey, this is cool. Who would actually buy your stuff? What do you describe? How do you describe it to them, right? What is your message to that buyer once you identify your target audience? And then, of course, nowadays, you can pick so many channels by which to communicate that message. And so it took us almost a whole year to figure out that auditors and compliance people are natural targets for, forensics tools, if you will, if you apply the lie detection technology to that. But their buying cycles and the messages for them and all that didn't result in any kind of quick sale. These are long, them well, enterprise sales cycles, easily a year or more. I'm just too impatient, right? As a startup founder, you can't be that patient, generally, to wait 12 plus months for your customers to start buying. So we kept, I wouldn't call it pivoting, that's the trendy term. We just kept adjusting our message and adjusting our focus. If you're kind of aiming a gun at the market, it's basically just, aiming it a little bit left and left and left, until we realized that the urgency wasn't on the back end part of governance and risk and compliance around data. It's on the front end now, the security of it, the cybersecurity of it. And so we've been applying our technology for detecting adversaries, cyber attackers, cyber criminals that lie, that pretend to be other people, that pretend to be other software, in your system that acts as malware, that pretend to, to not have tampered with access logs or databases when they do. And we detect that much earlier in a more automated manner than alternate solutions that we tend to more complement than even compete against. So today, I would tell people, particularly a tech audience, we're a cybersecurity company, and we focus on a very often quoted figure of 39% of all cyber attacks go undetected today, despite $125 billion cybersecurity market. And we focus on that 39%. We don't solve all of it, but we knock it down more than any other solution right now, because we acknowledge the reality that stealth attackers are today's reality, and it's hard to detect stealth, and we do.
All right. So what's your Twitter handle?
It's Valbu, which is spelled VALB00, but it's pronounced Valbu by my friends. And that's the easiest way to find me, even on LinkedIn and some other places where you can use the handle.
So I'm actually going to put the link to your Twitter account, because what you do, and by following you on Twitter, what I learn a lot about what's in the news. You and the people that you comment on and are a part of your community talk about the things we hear about in the news, but don't quite understand. And you guys are on the front line of protecting us
Very
from
much so.
all that.
Yeah, the headlines are absolutely my friend. It started really with, not to get too political, but the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, I think, really put a spotlight on the abuse of, all the curators of our data and the complete lack of data privacy that goes on right now, the GDPR sort of update to that. And nowadays, you can see that I'm spending more of my time commenting not just on that data privacy and compliance side, which is continuously a back-end requirement. It's the long tail of what we do, but very much on the power curve where the urgency is in the marketplace right now. And that is the fact that it is a cyber war out there. And there are both nation state consequences as well as economic and business as well as personal consequences to the war that is out there on the internet. And yeah, citing specific examples is what I like to do, and specific things that adversaries do and we can do to protect ourselves is a hobby on one side, but it's definitely all about the business end nowadays as well.
Sure. So yeah, no. So I suggest people follow you if they really want to understand what's going on. So my parting question is going to be a two-part question. Now that you're a CEO,
Mhm.
what do you love about being a CEO in charge of your own destiny, leading a company, leading the charge, being over your skis a little bit?
Yeah.
So what do you love about that?
Well, if there's a second part, I can tell you that, first and foremost, you kind of have to acknowledge the obvious. Being a CEO is a kind of a tribute to your ego. It definitely strokes your ego. So that's I think a big part of being a CEO is recognizing that and playing to that. But in addition to the other obvious things, if I get to set my own time and schedules, and no one has to approve my travel requests, or no one has to tell me to fly into a conference on a Sunday night, uh, it's certainly not as glamorous as people make it out to be. You're very much the janitor, you're very much the receptionist.
Oh no, no, you're going into the second part of my question. I want to know what you love about being the leader of a company and of a movement of something important.
So the real reason I got into this is that I've learned again to trust my own instincts. I've learned that I can spot technology trends in particular at the very early days. I think on LinkedIn I say I connect the dots, a little bit quicker than other people do.
And you always
And
have.
yeah, and recognizing that and realizing that is a leadership position. And the role of a good leader is to get followers to believe in your mission and to go forth and create something of value and add value to people, add value to businesses and so forth. So what I love most about being a CEO is just formalizing the ability to recognize trends, to have a vision and an opinion around them, and have a whole bunch of people that buy into that vision and that mission and see a lot of personal benefit in joining the mission and creating something of value and then unleashing it on the world. And my biggest compliment for people, because I like to create platforms more than just products, is when customers and partners and other constituents take the platform, the core technology we've created, and apply it in ways we've never imagined and see value out of it as
That's
well.
gotta be satisfying.
That is probably from a propeller head academic sense, from a tech ego sense, the most satisfying thing to me is to see people using what I create in ways I never imagined.
Yeah, that's got to be totally satisfying and way cool, especially for a creative guy. Before I ask my second question, coaching aside, note is the other thing about being a CEO, being the leader of a company. You mentioned the ego perks with a little smirk on your face if people could see
Yeah.
the video, but there's also an ego part of that that's actually important, which is being able to hold the space of the face of your company, being able to hold the space of leadership, which is a kind of lonely thing because the buck
Yes.
stops with you. You have to make decisions, right? So you need to be able to hold that space as the leader and the face of your company. And so you have to need a healthy ego at the same
Yes.
time as watch the other stuff. So that's another beautiful thing that I see with you.
And I would double down on that comment. I mean, what I realized is, particularly if you not just want to be a CEO, but if you want to be a CEO in a fast-paced industry like tech, then and in particular an early stage startup that if you're seeing the HBO Silicon Valley show, it's an owner's manual for founders. It's not just a comedy. The roller coaster emotional side of it is real. And if you don't have a healthy sort of emotional life, if you don't have some support at home, if you don't maybe have a therapist you see regularly, you are going to struggle because the ups and downs of running a startup are, you can't explain it to people until you experience it. The highs and the lows, the emotional highs and the emotional lows, you need a coping mechanism to deal with it. And that's either a hobby, a home life, drugs, I don't know what it takes,
Or a
but
really good executive coach.
yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. I discounted that in the early days, but I shouldn't have, because I've seen firsthand that that's a necessary element to success.
Yeah, I make an entire living on keeping CEOs together when the shit hits the fan, right? So it's really
And
good.
yeah, I don't know how you market yourself, because it's something that every CEO says, it's not me. I don't need this. And then you're in the thick of it and you realize, oh my God, I need this more than anything else to recalibrate myself. So
The truth is, the way I market myself is something happens and somebody says, you really need to talk to Mark. That's like 100%. Nothing, none of my podcasts, none of my marketing, nothing gets me clients, right? Write books doesn't get me clients. 100% of my clients are, you really need to talk to Mark. But I don't want to talk to anybody. No, trust me, talk to Mark. And then they realize what a difference it makes to get all of that out, to understand. And then the rocket ship takes off, which is really, really fun. So I was going to ask the second question, but I don't really think I need to ask it, which is, what do you hate about being a CEO? Oh, the pressure, the ups and downs, the buck stops with me, right?
It's a lonely position. And yeah, the buck stops here is a profound statement that has a lot of consequences, and it's true and it's real. And so I just think it's a lot more work around the things that you love than you anticipate. And a little bit of the benefits of success are you start to replace, some of the roles you're playing with people that are better than you at it. And a good CEO, of course, realizes that they're probably good at a handful of things and they suck at a lot of things. And finding people that are better than you and letting your ego do that is again essential towards success, because no one is good at everything, and no business will grow or thrive if one person tries to get way out over their skis and just crash, like we've seen on Wide Worlds of Sports 20 years ago and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I hand the book Rocket Fuel to every CEO client. And I'm like, know this, read this. And Rocket Fuel talks about visionaries versus implementers, right?
Interesting. Yeah,
And
yeah. Yeah.
there's visionaries are a dime a dozen. There's a lot of alcoholic deadbeat visionaries who had
Yeah,
great
yeah.
without an implementer, right? Steve Jobs would not be who he was. Like you can go down the line. Each one had their counterbalance of a brilliant visionary, of a brilliant implementer, and basically the adult supervision, right, to the ricochet rabbit of a
Yes.
visionary. And to start letting those things go and do what is your zone of genius, then it's definitely rocket fuel for the company. Val, thank you for spending the time with me. I really appreciate it. Selfish catching up with you, but
It's been too long, and a very much expected pleasure.
so next time you're in DC, there's a meal with your name on it. I'd love to catch up.
It's a lock.
And to everybody else, I just really appreciate you spending your time and attention with me and my guests. I love you. Have a great rest of the day.